Marina O'Leary had always loved the gentle hush inside St. Aloysius Church on Ivy Island. Early morning light spilled through the stained glass windows, illuminating the dust motes in front of the worn oak pews. She trailed her fingertip along the back of a pew, marveling at the centuries of worship that had taken place in this sanctuary. As the island's community choir director, Marina spent countless hours here, rehearsing anthems, turning the airy acoustics into bold harmony, and it was during one of her usual practice sessions that she first noticed something amiss. It happened while she studied the old hymn notes for the upcoming harvest service. The church maintained a trove of ancient hymnals, and as she flipped open a battered green cover, she spotted something peculiar. Tiny symbols, barely larger than a pinhead, appeared in the margins of the musical score. They looked like intricate triangles containing a swirl of delicate lines. At first, she thought it might be a printing error or even a bit of scribbling from a child. But the marks were too consistent and precise, repeating in certain sections of hymns, especially those that had to do with redemption or secret light. The deeper she looked, the more the puzzle drew her in. She decided not to mention it to anyone at first. After all, no one else seemed to have spotted these markings, or if they did, they never spoke about it. But Marina had a penchant for puzzles, inherited, she liked to think, from her father, a small-town librarian who believed every curious detail was worth exploring. And so, after finishing the choir practice, she gathered the ancient green hymnal under her arm with the intention to investigate further. Over the next few days, she discovered something. The symbols also popped up in a handful of other old hymnals, hidden in similar spots next to certain musical lines. She soon realized these symbols weren't simply random doodles. They followed a pattern, always near the phrase "redeem" or references to locked-away secrets. Fascination overcame her. It was the beginning of a mystery that would lead her to the most seldom visited corner of St. Aloysius's attic. Rumors in Ivy Island said the attic held nothing but dust and out-of-tune bells. Few visited it after it was deemed too cramped, too dark, and too precarious. Few leftover boxes from rummage sales were rumored to be up there, but no one truly knew. The caretaker, Mr. Oswald, was in charge of the entire building's upkeep and held the only known set of keys to the thick door that led to the attic. His family had been caretakers for generations, but if anyone asked him about the attic, he would just shrug and say something about old junk. Nobody pressed the issue. Marina, however, had always been a little tenacious. After choir practice one brisk autumn evening, she found Mr. Oswald in the back courtyard gathering leaves into a tarp. She approached with the hymnals in her hands. Mr. Oswald was a wiry man, pushing 80, who still insisted on climbing rooftops and clearing gutters. He smiled faintly when he saw Marina. "Is there something I can do for you?" he asked, tipping his cap. She noticed dust and bits of leaves on his sweater. "I'm so sorry to bother you. I've uncovered some unusual symbols in a few of our old hymnals. I wondered if I might take a peek in the church attic, see if there are any old documents or books that could explain them." Mr. Oswald snapped upright and dusted off his hands. "The attic is locked up, you know. Not much there to see, just some old boxes. You'll get covered in dust. Are you sure this can't be found in the library archives?" Marina shook her head. "The library's records are missing big chunks of church documentation from the 19th century. Perhaps there's something stored in the attic. Old ledgers, diaries, that might match these symbols." He pursed his lips, considering her request. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a metal key ring with at least a dozen keys dangling. He thumbed through them before selecting a hefty iron key. "If you're set on it, I'll take you up there. But you must be careful. Mind the floorboards." She thanked him and followed him through the winding staircase that ended at an imposing wooden door. A brass padlock from decades past secured it. Mr. Oswald inhaled, inserted the iron key, and turned until the padlock popped open. The door groaned on its hinges, revealing a narrow flight of stairs climbing into shadow. They stepped into the attic. The space was cramped, with a heavy wooden beam cutting across the center. Dusty boxes were scattered haphazardly. Cobwebs hung from corners like neglected streamers. A single, unshaded light bulb glowed overhead, revealing far corners filled with forgotten crates. Marina noticed the musty smell, like old paper and cloth. She was about to thank Mr. Oswald, but then she spotted something near the far side of the attic. A trunk with an iron clasp, its surface adorned with faint carvings. She walked over, her heart fluttering. Mr. Oswald followed with some reluctance, shining a flashlight on the trunk. The carvings caught the beam of light. Marina bent down, brushing away the thick dust on the lid, and discovered patterns that looked suspiciously like the tiny symbols she had found in the hymnals. The trunk was locked, a heavy padlock so old it had turned green with patina. Mr. Oswald grunted. I've seen this trunk for ages, but I never gave it much thought. My father said it was left here by the old choir director, maybe 100 years ago. He never told me what was inside. Aina's pulse quickened, but something else stood out. The pattern of triangles and spirals was identical to the small symbols in the margins of the hymns. She tried the trunk's lid, but it didn't budge. She almost asked if Mr. Oswald had a key for this padlock, but she could tell by his uneasy expression it was most likely lost to time. He shifted his weight. Anything else you need, Miss Lalery? She took a breath. No, thank you. This is more than enough. I'll see if I can find any references in the library or the church records. But could you keep the attic unlocked for a bit? He shrugged, relenting. All right. But I'll lock it back up every night once you're out. It's safer that way. He gave her a quick nod before stepping carefully back to the door. The old floorboards let out a mournful groan. Alone with the trunk, Marina studied the carvings more carefully. She touched her fingertips to them, tracing the lines. There had to be information somewhere about who put these marks here and why. If it was an old choir director's trunk, perhaps he had left behind a coded message in the hymnals. Why would a choir director encode messages in the margins of music about redemption and locked secrets? It was too deliberate to be an accident. She attempted to see if there was any gap where the trunk's lock fastened. No such luck. She was forced to concede that, without the key, she couldn't learn more. She photographed the trunk with her phone, capturing both the engravings and the clasp. Then, tucking the hymnals under her arm, she descended the steps, wearing the memory of the trunk like a puzzle piece that wouldn't fit. Days passed, though her curiosity never wavered. She scoured the island's small historical society, flipping through dusty files. She examined property maps, old choir rosters, and diaries. She discovered that around 100 years ago, a choir director named Clementine Harper had served at St. Aloysius. Clementine's name popped up in diaries that mentioned her as a passionate woman who arrived from the mainland to reorganize the church's music library. She was known for her inventive compositions and for speaking of hidden legacies in religious texts. Oddly, the historical record made no mention of where she went or how long she served, only that she disappeared from Ivy Island abruptly in the mid-1880s. The diaries, penned by the island's residents, merely said she lost keys in old meeting notes. One note from a church trustee meeting stated, Miss Harper continues to insist that a lost key is needed before the special service can proceed. Another entry, a few days later, read, We remain uncertain about Miss Harper's private convictions. She speaks of cryptic insignia and hidden trunk contents. The meeting ended with no resolution, and then the records abruptly stopped mentioning Miss Harper altogether. Intrigued, Marina returned to St. Aloysius one evening to run choir rehearsal. Autumn's chill had begun to seep into the night air, and she welcomed the warmth of the sanctuary. The choir members, an enthusiastic group of 15, gathered around the piano. They rehearsed a few beloved hymns, the chords echoing with sweet resonance. Marina tried not to let her distraction show. Yet halfway through All That Is Hidden, she fumbled the page turn and nearly dropped the battered green hymnal. The strange symbols caught her eye again, and she momentarily froze, losing track of her place. No one else seemed to notice. The choir, lost in their own harmonies, simply followed her lead. But at the end of rehearsal, Mabel Townsend, notorious for her sharp observational skills, approached, curling the corner of her music folder against her palm. "Marina, dear, is everything all right? You seem a bit preoccupied. Fancy telling me what's going on?" Marina hesitated. Mabel was a trusted confidant, known for her warm scones and her ability to keep a quiet secret. So Marina told her about the puzzling symbols and the locked trunk in the attic that might belong to Clementine Harper. Mabel's eyes shone with excitement. "That trunk has been up there ever since my grandmother was a church volunteer. I always wondered what was inside it, but I never dared to ask for the key. Mr. Oswald is quite protective of that attic." "I know," Marina sighed. "He let me in to look around, but we couldn't open the trunk." Mabel pursed her lips in thought. "You should talk to Father Glenn, or dig deeper into the diaries. If there's a clue to that trunk, Clementine must have left it behind for a reason. But do be careful. Secrets aren't always the comfortable sort." The next day, after a quick phone call, Marina headed over to Father Glenn's cottage on the edge of the church property. A mild-mannered priest in his 40s, he had inherited many of the old church's quirks and responsibilities. She explained the situation, carefully leaving out no detail. Father Glenn's initial surprise gave way to quiet contemplation. He escorted Marina into his living room, lined with shelves containing everything from medieval theology tomes to local genealogies. Then he disappeared momentarily into a side room and returned holding a small wooden box. Inside the box, nestled in velvet, lay a handful of old keys. "These keys," he began, "were left in the rectory safe by past priests. Many belonged to locked compartments in the vestry or old file cabinets. But I've never had reason to figure out each one's purpose." Marina's eyes lit up as she gingerly picked up a rusted key. She examined them one by one. Despite differences in shape and size, none seemed to match the trunk's heavy lock, until she came upon a key with a triangular bow. Faint swirl designs etched into the metal. Her heartbeat sped up. She recognized the swirl. It was the same swirling line that formed part of the mysterious symbols in the hymnals. She could hardly believe her luck. With Father Glenn's permission, Marina borrowed the key. She raced back to St. Aloysius that very afternoon. Mr. Oswald unlocked the attic door, looking both amused and mildly anxious. "Let's see if you found the right one." They climbed into the dusty attic. The trunk waited in the corner, silent witness to a secret kept for generations. Marina fit the key into the old padlock. For a moment, she worried it wouldn't turn. Then, with a loud click, the lock opened. A hush fell over them, as though the dust motes gathering in the beam of light paused. She lifted the lid. The hinges squealed in protest. Nestled inside lay sheets of carefully written music, a few letters tied with ribbon, and what looked like a smaller, carved wooden box. Marina draped her cardigan over a nearby crate and gingerly removed the items. Lightly brushing dust from the top manuscript, she realized she was looking at an unpublished hymn scribbled in Clementine Harper's ornate script. The words were partially written in English and partially in some unknown code that resembled the bizarre margin symbols. The title read, "Hymn of the Hidden Key." Her breath caught. This was more than a simple trunk of personal possessions. It seemed to be a repository of Clementine's secret compositions. Curious, she unfolded one of the letters. It was addressed to the future choir mistress, written in an elegant, deliberate hand. Marina glanced at Mr. Oswald, who retreated a few steps, giving her space. Then she carefully read, "I leave this trunk in faith that one day my successor in the music ministry shall unravel the legacy hidden within the lines of our worship. The symbols you have uncovered are a code crafted to protect a blueprint for a sacred composition. This music, if performed with true faith and understanding, is said to reveal a forgotten trust, something the Church once safeguarded but lost. Be it rumored or true, these words belong to all who seek redemption. May your search bring light. Marina's heart thudded in her chest. She carefully set aside the letter and reached for the smaller wooden box. It was unlocked. Inside it was a single medallion, aged brass, with the swirling triangle symbol at its center. On the back, etched so faintly she nearly missed it, was a short line: "Break the silence, open the door." Curiosity seized her, and she rifled through the other manuscripts. Some were more coded hymns. Others were diaries referencing the lost treasure of Ivy Island. Whispered legends had always abounded about valuables hidden on the island, though usually dismissed as romantic fantasy. Clementine's letters suggested the treasure was not gold but knowledge, a particular truth entrusted to the Church. At that instant, Father Glenn's presence on the stairs made her jump. "I was anxious," he said softly, stepping forward. "I wanted to see what you found." Marina explained the trunk's contents, the coded hymns, Clementine Harper's intentions, the medallion. Father Glenn's calm features revealed excitement. "It's remarkable," he said, carefully picking up a page of old music. Perhaps this is why Clementine left in such a hurry. She might have been misunderstood or even considered heretical for weaving cryptic messages into church hymns. Marina nodded. "The question is, what do we do now? We have these coded compositions, references to a hidden knowledge. But how do we decode them?" Father Glenn tapped a finger to his chin. "I suspect we can use the symbols in the published hymnals as a guide. They must correspond to notes or intervals that will unlock the meaning. If we can connect them to the text in these manuscripts, we may come up with a coherent message." Shortly thereafter, they enlisted Mabel's help. Over several evenings, the trio gathered around a table in the choir room, analyzing each swirl, triangle, and coded snippet. Clementine had created a cipher blending musical intervals with an alphabet key. After many cups of tea, they made their first breakthrough. One of the coded stanzas in the manuscripts flawlessly matched a segment in the old hymn, "Holy Spirit, Guide Me." Each swirl corresponded to an interval jump in the melody. By mapping out the intervals and letters, they spelled words, and before long they had a full line. "Seek the black stone beneath the oldest bench." They exchanged glances. St. Aloysius did indeed have a set of old wooden benches in the courtyard, rumoured to be older than the church itself. The next morning they rushed outside, scanning each weather-worn bench for any sign of a black stone. Near the ivy-clad fence, they found the oldest bench, its seat warped and pitted from centuries of use. The bench's underside had a wedge of stone hammered in at a corner. The stone was black granite, chipped away at one corner. Carefully, Mr. Oswald used a small crowbar to loosen it. Behind the stone lay a small alcove in the bench, containing a folded piece of parchment. Marina carefully slid it out. The parchment listed lyrics to an especially cryptic verse, referencing something called "The Hidden Choir" and "The Promise Made of Old." Printed at the bottom was a short note: "In the presence of faithful voices, the hidden verses shall come to light. Sing with hearts open, and the knowledge shall be revealed." Could it be that the final key was to sing Clementine's composition in St. Aloysius, using the correct lyrics? Marina felt a chill of excitement mingled with apprehension. That same afternoon she gathered the choir in a hush of secrecy. They convened in the sanctuary, the shutters drawn to keep prying eyes away. After explaining only that they had discovered a forgotten composition by a former choir director, she passed out reproduced sheets of Clementine's coded hymn, which she and Father Glenn had painstakingly deciphered. The choir members, lulled by curiosity and excitement, took their places. Marina raised her hands. A hush fell. Then they began to sing. The piece began softly, with a minor key that morphed into a yearning melody. The words spoke of trust and devotion, referencing the swirling triangles and a hidden promise. As the music swelled, the stained glass windows seemed to glow with an internal radiance, the timbre of the choir filling every inch of the sanctuary. Halfway through, Mabel's voice carried a descant that soared high, sending occasional chills down Marina's arms. She pressed forward, guiding the choir to the final chord, each note resonating in perfect harmony. The hush afterward felt profound. Then, from an alcove near the altar, a faint scraping sound echoed. Gathering her courage, Marina walked toward the noise, the rest of the choir trailing behind. In the quiet, a hidden panel in the wall stood slightly ajar, revealed by the vibrations of their singing. Within its shallow recess glinted a small metal box. The swirling triangle motif was etched onto its lid. Father Glenn whispered a prayer, then opened the box. Inside lay a single parchment folded over an ancient photograph of Clementine Harper, standing before a group of choir members from the late 1800s. They gazed solemnly at the camera. Pinned beneath this photo was a short letter that read, "Whoever finds this has completed my journey. Protect the knowledge shared in these hymns. True spiritual harmony comes not from hidden wealth, but from hearts united. May Ivy Island always sing with sincerity." Marina gently held the photograph in her trembling hand. The letter was both a benediction and a quiet resolution, verifying that Clementine had concealed her grand design within music so it wouldn't be lost. It wasn't about treasure in the usual sense. It was about the intangible gift of faith and unity. Father Glenn smiled, though tears glistened in his eyes. Mabel dabbed her cheek. Even Mr. Oswald, lurking at the back, seemed moved. It was spread in hushed tones. Though the details remained discreet, people in the congregation sensed something special had emerged. Over the next few Sundays, Marina introduced snippets of Clementine's recovered compositions, weaving them subtly into services. The melodies brought a new warmth. St. Aloysius thrummed with renewed appreciation for the past. Though they never made a public announcement about the trunk, the choir members who had shared in the experience carried a sense of deeper connection to one another and the old church's legacy. As for the trunk, Marina and Father Glenn decided to preserve it carefully, using funds from the Historical Society to catalogue each letter and composition. The trunk remained in the church attic, but with a new lock and a properly labelled sign describing it as the Clementine Harper Collection. While visitors could, with permission, request to see its contents, they would also learn of an extraordinary musical journey that spanned generations. Before the harvest service arrived, Marina and Mabel sat together in the choir room, sipping fresh tea and poring over the coded manuscripts. They made plans to gradually decode every scrap of Clementine's music, understanding that some of it might remain puzzling for years. They felt content to let the secrets unravel slowly, in harmony with the church's steady rhythms. Sometimes mysteries weren't meant to be solved all at once. On the day of the harvest service, the entire congregation packed into the pews. Warm autumn light tinted every person's face through the stained glass windows. Pumpkins and cornstalks adorned the altar, and the air smelled faintly of apples and cinnamon from the post-service refreshments. The choir, arranged in a semicircle, wore modest robes adorned with a small, swirling triangle pin, a new tradition that Mabel had suggested to honor Clementine's legacy. When the final hymn commenced, Marina's heart soared. She guided the choir in a joyous refrain that blended Clementine Harper's once-lost notes with the congregation's familiar lines of praise, gazing across the sea of faces, some devout, some skeptical, but all engaged. Marina recognized the lasting gift. a community brought together by the power of a mystery that championed unity instead of hidden greed. She thought of Clementine's photograph, the secrets in the trunk, the marked hymnals that had set this entire adventure in motion. There, within the ancient stones of St. Aloysius, a legacy continued, and though the trunk was no longer locked, it remained a symbol of music's ability to safeguard stories, to guide seekers to understanding, and to unite a small island parish in resounding harmony.